You joined Rippling, I think right around the Series A at a really important time for the company. And I'm a Rippling user. I'm a big fan of Parker. How did you think about approaching product marketing for Rippling? Because I think what's tricky with Rippling is it is this compound startup. There's a lot of different products. There's a lot of pieces to it. So how did you sort of think about that in the early days?
Yeah, I mean, I've had a bad habit as a product marketer of picking really hard to product market products as all of my roles that I go into because I like the challenge, and I think in reality, like Rippling is probably one of the hardest products out there to actually do product marketing for, partly because of bandwidth, partly because of the positioning challenges that come with compound startups, and like it's funny, I came out of Rippling and I was like, oh my god, I'm so burnt out from trying to like wrangle all this stuff in my head and building this compound startup, and then went out and started one. It kind of has all the same characteristics. And so I think, the ways that I went into it, thinking about it, were one, I think when you're building a compound startup like that and you have multiple different sub products that are all like, you can't tell each of those stories all in one big package. You really need like a unifying narrative that is at the platform level. So you actually really need to like chunk out the way that you think about the product as a series of sub products and treat it as a true portfolio where product marketing any individual component is actually really easy. You know how to position the payroll product relative to other payroll products, but you need to think about like how that payroll product interacts with all the other products in your portfolio, and then come up with, what like now, I think has been kind of branded around Rippling Unity, which is, this underlying concept of, hey, all of these things are better because they are tied into the employee record, and because that employee record has all the characteristics that end up driving all the automation that those other tools use. And then you got to bring that to life with a bunch of different like specific examples and case studies, in order to make people actually believe the claims that you're making. Because a lot of times the biggest risk when you're marketing a big platform, beyond people just not understanding what it does, is they have been burned so many times by, kind of the jack of all trades, master of none products that don't actually deliver value effectively. And they give you kind of a B minus version of all of those different products. So you really need, the only way to overcome that is through like heavy social proof and being able to like really tie it to very, very specific workflows where you can surface like exact recipes for how that product is gonna work. So it was a lot of like toggling up and down between altitudes. Like I think a lot of product marketers in more kind of straightforward companies, they get locked into like the altitude of product that they're working at, and they're like, okay, I own this like feature set, or I own this like individual product, and they're not really great at like toggling up to the platform level messaging and then back down to the product level messaging. You really need to build that muscle in your head in order to be able to effectively communicate these things.
And what does this work actually look like? Are you creating a bunch of positioning docs and running it by Parker and other people on the team to be like, hey, how does this work for our platform positioning? And then for each of the different product positioning. And then once you do that, do you just create a bunch of decks and websites and assets based off of that? Like, what does that work kind of look like on a more day-to-day or granular level while you're there?
Yeah. So I think that, I mean, like Rippling has a pretty unique, like heavily execution driven culture. And so, I think like we were just shipping stuff in a lot of cases and there wasn't as much like review process involved. But, the way that I like to think about this is like you start from the very top. You need to kind of like trickle down in levels of granularity. So the first thing that I did when I came in there was go through a full positioning exercise around the platform. Try and surface like what are the things that are true about this thing that are not true about any of the other adjacent products in the categories that we play in, and try to like actually define, in this case, like the rules of the category that we play in as well. So I tried to kind of like put us into a box that was somewhat inclusive of some of the other competitors like Gusto and Zenefits, but was also ownable enough that it could be specific to Rippling, and only Rippling could really tick all of the boxes for the category that we were talking about playing in. Did that positioning work at the platform level, ran a bunch of docs through Parker and Matt and some of the other folks at the company. And there were a lot of like workshops leading into that to get at those like little kernels of truth. And then once we had that like top level messaging, it's really about pulling that down quickly into the different sub product messages and like communicating what that product does. Like first and foremost, like very clearly, what is that product? and through the lens of its existing category. And I try to not like say, hey, we're like not a payroll tool, we're something else. It was like the payroll product is a payroll product, but it's a payroll product that's better because it connects into this platform level message. And so using that platform story as the differentiator was really like the way that we ended up kind of winning in our break the storytelling.
When I think about positioning, I always think of this framework as you can either reinvent a category or try and create a new category. I'm curious, like rippling is a little bit of both. Is that right? Or is that the right read on it? And I'm curious how you think about kind of that framework and which type of those sort of choices do you prefer?
We kind of split the difference a little bit. I mean, like rippling is a little bit of both, where, like the nice thing about what rippling does is that like it's kind of mashing together a couple of categories that are pretty well defined and easy for people to like shorthand and wrap their head around. So you can be like, yeah, we're HR software. And like HR software contains this big bucket of stuff underneath that includes payroll and benefits and everything else. And so we kind of leaned into that as like the existing category, like baseline that we would frame around a little bit. But our whole goal was always to like do some category creation, because the only way that you could actually break people out of a direct like one-to-one feature comparison with other HR tools was to tell this like bigger category story about being, this workforce management platform. And so I don't have a bias to like one or the other. I think that for 90% of companies, like they should not go create a category. It comes with a lot of pain. It's an expensive process. It requires a lot of customer education, a lot of brand building over time. And frankly, like most companies don't have the chops in-house to do the narrative design to be able to like actually tell a story that's compelling around creating a category. So most companies should just lean into their existing category and be really clear about like, we are in this category. That gives customers a really clear frame of reference for what their product does at the baseline, but then, explain very clearly like what separates them from that category and like how they differentiate it. When you're talking about like growing categories that exist already, that's another strategy you can take. It's hard. That's equally hard to do, but it's much more prevalent in like CPG, where you're kind of taking a lot of the playbook from category creation, but trying to just expand the pie overall for everybody within your space. I think you're seeing that with a lot of the AI companies right now. Like their strategy should all be not like create a category. It shouldn't be, plug into an existing category. It should be like grow the category for their specific subset of AI infra, for example.
Yep. Makes a ton of sense.